Great. Okay, so welcome you guys to our second edition of Product Conversations. My name is Jamala Holder, and the reason why I put these conversations together is doing my product management consulting and advisory with a lot of founders, and more recently, some PMs helping them start to land product management roles. What I realized is that a lot of people have fantastic ideas, things that they want to do, but when it comes to the actual execution of those ideas, there's, a lot of tension or frustration around how do I take this thing that I know I want to do, that I know I want to build, and, how do I get to that next level? So my name is Jamala Holder. I am a product advisor. I started my own advisory practice about a year and a half ago after meeting a number of startup founders here in the Miami community who would ask me a number of different questions about my role in product management at LinkedIn, how I could support them and help them as they were getting from that ideation stage and wanted to move along the product management lifecycle to get into a launch stage where they've launched an MVP. Or perhaps sometimes some of those founders were also thinking about, hey, I've already launched this MVP. I'm getting a lot of customer signal. What do I do next? So I initially just started taking phone calls, strategic phone calls, brainstorming phone calls with founders, and realized that I loved what I was doing with them, not only from a perspective of keeping my product management skills sharp, but also from the perspective of making sure that I'm able to impact other with the knowledge that I have. And so I founded my own consultancy, really just focused on trying to spread a lot of knowledge and spread a lot of joy and knowledge at the same time, as people are really just learning product management. And you don't have to learn everything in product, but I think if you're a founder, especially, there are certain things that you probably not know that you could do that would be simple changes for you to make because you just haven't built product from a structured product management perspective before. So the goal of Product Conversations is that we host these monthly Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and we do a number of different topics every month. What I want to make sure is that these conversations are relevant to you. So at the end of today's conversation, we are going to talk about what other topics you'd like for us to see and to focus on, so that we can make sure that we're having great discussions about topics that are top of mind for you. Now, I'm super excited today because initially when I put together this founder PM and engineering topic, I was going to share, some insights and some slides on how you can work better with your engineers, some of the structured ways you can do these things with your engineers. But then I started thinking about the engineers that I have in my life. And so I was talking to Zach and I was like, Zach, do you mind joining me today? Now, Zach is incredible and one of my favorite engineers from LinkedIn. He and I work together on LinkedIn Learning Instructor Strategy, senior talent here, and just a great guy to know. And so I invited him to join us today. And our session today is going to be a bit more of an interview. We have a set of questions, but we really want to hear from you guys what's top of mind for you. So while we get through some of those sets of questions, please feel free to also drop your questions in the chat. And if we haven't addressed it by the end of the 15 or 20 minutes where we are talking through some of these topics, then we'll make sure to address it after we've wrapped up the kind of like formal interview part of our session today. But I am super excited to have Zach on the call with us to drop his gems, his knowledge on our group, because he's dropped a lot of knowledge on me when I was working at LinkedIn. So I'm just glad to see his face again, and then also to see him here for our monthly product conversation. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So can you please tell everyone here, what has your roles in engineering been? Yeah, just give us a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. My journey started working for a company called the Capital Group. They're an investment firm. So I worked with them right out of college. And interestingly enough, I got hired by them full time And then I think we had the economic downturn in 2007. So I ended up working and consulting for Disney. So I spent a lot of time. I spent about a couple of years working and consulting for Disney, and then I moved on to working for lynda.com. So at Disney, I actually worked on a system called eDocs. Disney had decided at the time that they wanted to actually digitize a lot of the documentation and the operations manuals for the parks. So part of my job was working on a software that allowed them to digitize all of their documents, and they could effectively send documents or PDFs to other managers or executives for signatures as well, rather than having to pay for postage to do it. So I left that company, and then I started working for lynda.com. And so working for lynda.com, my journey kind of started more on the infrastructure side, working with the core architecture team, building a lot of the functionality on lynda.com. And then I was asked to step in and lead and design Lynda's member experience. So for those of you who may know about lynda.com, if you think of every experience you had from the moment you log into lynda.com, my team was effectively responsible for crafting that experience. And so I believe it was in 2015, Lynda gets bought by LinkedIn. And from there, I was given the opportunity to join the launch of LinkedIn Learning. So because a lot of my time had been spent on building and crafting the member experience on Lynda and a lot of the features there, I was asked to join the team in San Francisco and work with actually building and launching the new LinkedIn Learning product. So I spent a lot of time on learning. I want to say my journey between the companies, I've been doing this for probably a little over 15 years now. Um, so I worked with a lot of teams, both homegrown engineering teams, as well as working with contracting teams. I've worked on teams of various different sizes, different initiatives. I worked on what we call feature development teams, which is what Jamila and I were doing together. And I've also worked on teams that specialize specifically on building infrastructure and building tooling that other teams use to be successful. So I'm very excited to be here today. I'm happy. I'm always happy to share knowledge. I think that's one of the reasons why Jamila and I we clicked very well. She was very inquisitive, a lot of great questions, and those led to a lot of great conversations. And here we are. So hopefully, I can share some of that knowledge and answer some burning questions that folks may have where our world is considered.
All right, perfect intro. Thank you again. All right, so my first question for you, especially just given your years of software engineering, different companies you've worked for, what do you think makes a great founder or a great PM from an engineer's perspective?
Okay, so I'll tackle a great PM first. Um, so and then we'll talk about founders, and I'll explain why I'm going in this order in a second. From the perspective of PMs, I have worked with a lot of PMs over the years, and I think that there are a couple of patterns and things that I see emerge having worked with folks with different varying levels of experience. I think that from the perspective of an engineer, what we look for in someone who is a good PM versus a great PM, one of the biggest things we look at is communication. Great PMs are able to communicate not just horizontally, but also vertically, right? They're very methodical in their thinking. They tend to really invest in a particular product or feature that they're associated with. And so if they're, for example, coming into something that's pre-existing, you will automatically see them taking a step back and really just diving in to the deep end and really trying to understand the product, how it works, why it was built, why it does what it does, the way that it does. And then from that understanding, then you start to see them kind of move in the direction of how do I take this thing that has already been built as a moving ship, and how do I improve on it and make it better, right? So they look for opportunities to take a very simple feature and kind of 10x it to a certain extent, right? So they're constantly thinking of not just what a feature looks like today, but what it can look like in the future. And so why I say communication is great is because they're very good at sharing their thought process and walking you through their vision of a product from its inception all the way up to where they see it, whether that's depending on the life cycle of the actual product from 5 years to 10 years. Great PMs are able to do that, and they're able to do it with a level of comfortability and efficiency that is very visible right away. They're very confident when they talk about a product. You can get the sense within the first 10 minutes of conversation, like this person really understands this product inside and out. And you will see their knowledge kind of straddle both the product side of things, but also the engineering side of things, because they're constantly asking questions of the engineers. Hey, we built this feature. Can you tell me about the feature, what it does? What are some of the pain points with it? They don't just want to know the good. They're like, give me the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to know everything there is to know because I want to genuinely own this so that when I walk into a room and I have a conversation about this, whether I'm talking to an executive or I'm talking to another staff engineer or a principal engineer, I can comfortably walk into those conversations and explain the position of my position as well as my team's position on a feature or a product that we're building. And I can give a clear understanding of the why in terms of what we're doing, the how we're doing it, but I can do that comfortably from a product perspective. They don't necessarily need to be super technical. I've met product PMs who are very technical because some of them were actual developers before they actually crossed over and went into becoming PMs. So to me, those are some of the things that typically will stand out with a great PM or somebody that you tend to see engineers really gravitate towards from the perspective of them being a PM. With founders, that one is a little bit different because you are effectively the captain of the ship. And so your conversations with us as engineers will focus a little bit more on the 10,000 foot vision, not necessarily the details or the nitty gritty, because not every founder, and again, it really depends on the stage that you're in your company. If you're just starting out, you may have regular conversations with engineers that are very technical. And I think that we love to have conversations with founders who are just as invested in the product and the internal workings of that product. But what we also want to be able to see and what we look for in great founders um, is somebody who can sit down and really give me the 10,000 foot view of a product or of a product that we're building, but also give me some more details, but they're constantly aligning those details with the overall mission and vision of the product. There is a sense of strategy. There is a sense of this very deep, intricate thought process that has gone into the product that we're building, the roadmap for that product. What does a year versus 3 years versus 5 years look like? To me, those are the founders who tend to be very successful in conversations, whether that's with PMs or engineers, or whether they're talking to just the entire business overall, because it shows that there's a level of intentionality in the things that they're doing that comes across very quickly when you sit down and you're having conversations with them.
Cool. And you were talking a bit about like the details, right? So
Yeah.
the founder and the PM, they're both able to get into those details. And so my next question for you would be, how do you like to kind of receive those details, product requirements or feature requests? Like what makes the details via PRDs or some other way of sharing requirements with you? What makes some of the details clear versus confusing?
So when it comes to receiving requests, I think my preference, and I think that goes with a lot of engineers that I've spoken to, is through PRDs. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, when I'm reading through a PRD, it allows me to kind of take my engineering hat off for a second because I try to read PRDs from the perspective of the PM. I'm trying to see what the PM sees when they're building and they're thinking about building a particular feature. So one of the reasons why I prefer PRDs is because for me, it gives me a sense of what are we thinking about with respect to a product or a feature holistically. And then we kind of get into more of the details of when do we want to launch it? Um, how long, what are some of the features that we would like it to have? And so with some PRDs, you tend to also get like some of um, the product feature requests, you also get to see what are some of the use cases that were thought through while a PM was putting together that feature. So for me, the detail in the work is what really kind of separates a great PRD from something that's confusing. If a lot of the contents of the PRD is just very surface level, for me, it doesn't really help me as an engineer because now I have to go back and start asking a lot of detailed questions where the preference would have been to have some of that detail up front, which is I want to build, for example, I want to design this feature for an app that's used for delivering costumes for Carnival. Okay. What does your feature do? Well, I want to design a feature that allows a client to give me a location for their uniform where I can pick it up. Okay, so why do we want to do that? Well, from research and talking to band members for Carnival, we've learned that people find it very frustrating to return their costumes. We want to design a system that's a lot easier for them, that allows them, rather than them having to figure out where to go to drop off their costume, where there are multiple different points and it's not communicated very efficiently, they can just simply use their phone, give us their current location, and we can come and pick it up. Right. So from that alone, I understand. Okay, so you've actually gone out, you've talked to people where you've had conversations trying to understand what is the challenge for this particular feature that they're going through. And then you're thinking about, well, how can I solve it? Because there are different ways we can do this. We can in the app implement a feature that lets you see automatically where you can go and drop off a costume, right? But then you're saying, no, I want to take a more tailored approach. And rather than you bringing it to me in the pursuit of increasing the level of customer service of our business and kind of showing our clients that we care, no, don't bring your costume to me. I'm going to come to you and get it. Let me worry about all of the logistics of your costume. You just need to be available to hand it off to me, right? There's a difference in that versus saying, well, I want to build a feature for people to pick up their costumes. I just think it's a good idea because it would be cool to have it. Okay, well, did you have conversations with people? What kind of led to that? Because when it comes to discussing a feature, right, there's the ROI perspective of it that we have to sell, and it isn't just the PM selling it. I have to sell it as an engineer. So for me at LinkedIn, I'm a staff engineer. What that means typically is I lead engineering teams. When I look at a PRD, I have to be able to sit in a room with engineers and then give them the sense of the why and why this is important and why we should build this when I'm going through the design and the strategy of implementation. My job explaining that why and walking engineers through how we build products is more difficult when I don't have a PRD that gives me detail or gives insight into why we're doing the thing that we're doing. And I think that's the key thing that a lot of I see missed sometimes when PMs are thinking about features. Put yourself in the role of the customer because that to me goes a very long way when you're writing PRDs because now you're kind of writing them from the perspective of if I was a customer and I was using this app and I wanted to go through this experience, this is how I would want to see that experience go through. And then from there you can take your experience and put it up to other people and let them tell you, hey, you didn't think about this, you didn't think about that, but you're actually giving them the opportunity to start the conversation where you're already kind of bringing shape, form, and color to an idea where people can quickly get on board, where there's a lot of detail and insight into what has gone into your PRD versus something that is very surface level. Because now we all have to kind of read that PRD and start asking a lot of these different questions to get us to the thing that we want to build. And your PRD should already be communicating, this is the thing that we want to build. Here's why we want to build it. Here's the research that's gone into it. Here's the net effect that we believe we will achieve once it's been built. And here's the actual schedule or the process for launching it that we have, and here's how we think we want to launch it. Those things, when you combine them together, you have a very strong PRD. You have something that you can hand to a different product owner, you can hand it off to a manager, or you can hand it off to an engineer, and they can look at it and say, oh, okay, so you want to do this. Now my job becomes easier, because when I'm now sitting down and deciding how am I going to build this particular feature, what are the APIs involved, how are we going to store the data, if I understand what you're trying to do from that PRD, my job becomes 10 times easier, right? Because now I don't have to go and ask a whole lot of questions to figure out how do we build this thing. And then I now have to sit down, how do I get these engineers to kind of see the vision and bring them along? So the more color, the more detail you can add into a PRD, you're actually helping your engineering teams get more work done a lot faster, because you've done a lot of the heavy lifting for them. Now, I'm not saying that you should always do that, because some PRDs, depending on the feature that you want to build, they're complicated. And this is why I said communication for a PM is important, because great PMs, they communicate. And so sometimes you have PRDs where it isn't just a PM writing it, like you have input from engineering, because the feature or the thing that you want to build is very complicated, and it requires both the product understanding but also a more technical understanding to kind of bring that PRD together.
Completely agree. And I think this is already important, but I think what Zach just said is even more important when you have engineers that aren't in your time zone, because then you have the challenge of, if your engineer is 12 hours ahead of you, right? So when you're supposed to be sleeping, they're supposed to be awake executing on whatever instructions and requirements you've given them in a PRD. If your PRD isn't really written well, if it's not very clear, if it doesn't have the details that they need, they're going to be struggling to get their work done while you're sleeping. So then what's likely going to happen is that that engineer is sending you overnight communication, basically questions that they have, things that they have questions about that they're uncertain about. And you may not see that until you wake up in the morning. So when you wake up in the morning, you get to those questions and you answer those questions, but then they're sleeping while you're awake. And so it's an endless and unfortunately like a vicious cycle of not getting a lot of work done in a shorter time span if the communication that you've provided as a founder or as a PM isn't very clear to your engineers. And so the clarity is really what helps engineers to be able to like execute in a way that is going to not only avoid confusion, but allow for you to continue to move forward and make progress. Sometimes I've met founders who've said, hey, I gave instruction in a 45-minute call and I thought I was clear. And I was like, well, what else did you give them? Because a 45-minute call to have something built, especially from an engineering perspective with technical details, or at least some understanding so that the engineer can better understand what the technical details should be, is not necessarily going to get you the product or the feature or whatever it is that you want, because it's not written. And so, there's first that phone call that you might have, or the meeting that you might have, where you share overall what you're working on, why you're working on it. But you also have to provide that level of detail that Zach was just mentioning via the product requirements document that really lays out what the vision is for what's being built and the why, with also what specifically actually needs to be done via requirements, user stories, and the like.
Yeah. And then something to keep in mind too about that is because I have worked with, so for example, LinkedIn, most of the teams that I work with, they work for, they're engineers who are hired by LinkedIn. I have also worked on projects where the engineers are from a external company that we worked with out of Austria. And what I can tell you is, and I've done this quite a bit with external companies, when you're dealing with engineers who are not part of your company, they're not homegrown, they optimize on hours, billable hours. And it's not, I'm not saying that to knock them, it's not a negative thing, it's just the nature of their business. So the less clear that the thing you want to build is, you are going to spend more money building it, because now the time that you could have saved with having something where your PRDs and what you want to build being very clear, you are now spending more money because they're going to charge you by the hour depending on the contract that you have working on these things. And they're not going to sit there and say, well, hey, um, this is missing or that's missing. Because they optimize on hours, they're just going to treat that as part of the process. And so when you have a conversation and you're in these status update meetings and they're like, well, we had to actually go do X because we didn't have information on it and we had to go figure it out, you're now paying for that. So that's also something to kind of keep in the back of your mind, because depending on your how you set up your business, you may have engineers who work for you and they're external contractors where you're giving them a set of requirements to go and build something. So always keep in mind that however much detail you provide will effectively affect the speed at which things are done. And it will also affect your bottom line in terms of how much money you're actually spending.
Big facts. Big facts. And I think that's the thing that sometimes people don't realize, especially if they're hiring contract engineers, is
Hmm.
that those engineers aren't going to teach you what you should be doing. They're not going to
Correct.
teach you, hey, these are the best ways that, to communicate with me as an engineer. They're not necessarily there to teach you that. And they're not incentivized necessarily to do that either, especially if it's a contracting outsourced sort of engineering team um, that you've
Yeah.
not met. It doesn't mean that they can't deliver the work, but it also means that you as the PM, you as the founder, have to understand how to present the right information and right level of detail to them
Yep.
so that they can execute.
Yeah.
And they're not just kind of taking your money and your wheels are spinning, wondering why,
What's going on? Yeah,
yeah, what's
you're there.
going
You're
on, why
not
they
going to
haven't
hear
made
from them,
progress.
well, we can do it this way and we're going to save you X many dollars. No, that is not what they do. They take what you give them and they're going to go and build it. So that is something I think that a lot of founders are sometimes not aware of. I've spoken to some in the past where they've kind of gotten blindsided by that before. So it's super important for you to know what you want to build, how you want to build it, what you want it to look like, how you want it to function. If you're trying to leave that up to an external engineering team, you're going to have some pain there.
Completely agree. And I see that we have a question in the chat, and we'll get to that question very, very soon. And so, for my last question, what do you wish more PMs and founders understood about engineering work?
So I have a because I've been doing this for as long as I have, and I've been in the room with a lot of founders. I've worked with a lot of PMs. I have a very simple but a rule that I stand on, which is I do not lie. My job is not to tell you what you want to hear. It is to tell you what you have to work with, which means if you come to me and you tell me I want to sail to Italy, I'm the person it's my job to tell you, hey, if you go in 30 degrees in that direction, you're going to crash. You don't have to like it, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't honest. I think that there is a bit of a misconception sometimes between founders and engineers as to the work that goes into building a product and giving it life. And I think that sometimes I'll speak more so from founders, and then we'll talk about PMs. I think that um, sometimes founders can have these unrealistic expectations of the product that's being built, the complexity behind the thing that you want to build, because there's a difference in coming to me, for example, and saying that I want to build an app that allows people to sell shoes. It's an e-commerce app, right? And there are multiple ways that we can go around building that. It's a very big difference when you come to me and you say, I want to build an app that allows people to exchange money digitally, right? Now you can automatically see, obviously, I picked two very extremes here, where one, you're dealing with transferring money. That has to now deal with safety, security, there are standards and guidelines, and also the banking that has to be considered there. So you can see that the things that go into building an app for that are far more than the e-commerce product. And I think as founders, it's important for you to, you don't necessarily have to have all of the nitty gritty details around the thing that you want to build, but have a sense of the level of effort that's required that goes into it. And surround yourself with people that you know, that you trust, can help you execute on that vision. Don't leave it into the hands of people just because they say. I think sometimes founders kind of get that misconstrued, where just because somebody has these many years of experience that they're going to do the right thing for your product or your business. That's not the case. You need to spend the time and work with the talent that you have to understand them, because that affects ultimately not just the product you put out, but it affects the experience, the overall quality, and it just affects your product in general. So I think that's something, even from an engineering perspective, that I'd like um, more founders to kind of be aware of, because I've worked with external companies that are great, and I've worked with some that aren't so great. And so what I tend to see happen is there's a disconnect between the expectations of the business as far as the end product, and the company that they tend to choose to do it, right? When it comes to PMs, Jamila can speak to this. I think the very first time that we spoke, I I told Jamila, look, when it comes to whatever it is we build, my rule with you is always going to be simple. Build whatever you want at whatever scale you want, and let me be the person to rein you in. Now, that sounds strange and it sounds very odd, but I'll explain the method behind the madness, if you will. When you're building a feature, I don't believe, from the perspective of interacting with a PM, that you should immediately give them a set of constraints, because you're taking a person who has to figure out how to build a product, and you're effectively giving them this box. And you're like, no, 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 you can't call outside of any of these lines. That's not how great features are built. Sometimes it requires you to think outside of the box. And so the reason why we were able to work very well together is because what I'm trying to convey to her is, I trust you to lead from the perspective of the product, the vision, and the overall strategy. And my job as an engineer is to take your vision and execute it. So I'm trusting you to do what you do well, and I need you to trust me to do what I do well, which is, if I tell you this thing is going to take 2 weeks, I'm not blowing smoke like it is going to take 2 weeks. Now, if you need it in a week, I can figure some things out, but this is how long it's going to take. It is very important that you build trust with your engineers. I
Mhm.
have been on teams where there's a great amount of trust between product and engineers, so that when a PM goes into a meeting with the executive team or with leadership, and they say, this is what we're doing and this is how long it takes to get done, and that time is met, people are always like, wow, like, you told us this was going to take um, this was going to take 3 weeks or 3 months, and it literally took 3 months. You guys did it, you launched it, you delivered it. What that typically means for a PM is, when they walk into these spaces and they're having these conversations, people look at you and they're like, oh, this person can deliver. They delivered on the thing that they said they were going to, in the time that they said they were going to. The only way that you get to that is having a level of trust between yourself and the engineers that you work with, that they're able to execute and do the things that they need to do, and that they're allowing you the space and the freedom to do the things that you need to do. It doesn't work if I'm trying to tell Jamila how to be a PM. And it doesn't work if Jamila is trying to tell me how I'm supposed to be an engineer. Now, don't get me wrong, as a PM, it is very important, I think, that when you want to build a feature, if you have a very specific way that you think it needs to function, challenge the engineers on that. Push them. That's okay. It's okay for you to say, you guys want to do this thing as a list, but I need it to basically support grouping. And here's why. And if at LinkedIn, we have something called a clean escalation. So, for example, if Jamila wants to build something and I don't agree with it, we take it to a manager. She presents her side, I present my side. And then a manager makes a decision. And if the manager can't decide, we go one step higher. And we do this through like a 5-step process until we get to a point of resolution. Once we've done that, we both walk away to where we're not upset at each other, we're not arguing, we're not fighting. It's just a part of the structure and the process that the business has implemented to allow us to work and have difficult conversations. Right? It's not anything where now I suddenly hate Jamila because I lost in this discussion on building this feature. I've gone into those meetings and I've won many of them and I've lost some of them, and that's okay. But don't be afraid to challenge. Great engineers, we love challenge. We love you to up the ante. We thrive under pressure, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just keep it's a balance, right? It's a very delicate balance. And I think that the thing that gets you there is having that sense of trust and working with um, those engineers. And like I said, understanding the people that you're working with, I think, is very important, because I have one thing that especially when I'm dealing with contractors, like I try to get a sense of contractors from who is more of an execution person, who is more of a visionary. And when I say visionary, what I mean by that is this is an engineer where I can say, hey, go and build this feature for me, and they can do that because they also understand architecture. Not every engineer has that ability. So as a PM, it's also important that as you're working with engineers, understand the kind of engineer that you're working with and their personality. Are they the kind of person where you can send them, you can work with them and build complete systems? Or are they an engineer where they're good at the execution, but they lack a little bit of talent, or they lack a little bit of experience when it comes to architecture and design? Not everybody's the same. And I think even for founders, I think that's also important. Like if you're looking for a chief technical officer who's going to lead the vision on the engineering side of a product, you want somebody who has experience, a proven track record of doing that. You wouldn't just simply hand it off to anybody, right? So understanding and getting to know the engineers and the people that you're working with is also super important, because as a PM or a founder, different people do different things very well. With founders, you typically are told find people and surround yourself with people who account for your deficits, which is you may be a great visionary, but you're not necessarily the best at the technical execution. And so you may need to find somebody who can actually accomplish that for you. And so it's very important to have it to be able to navigate and work with different types of people, because everybody, just because they have a hat of an engineer or a PM, their strengths and their abilities are different. And so great PMs understand, they're able to spot those strengths and those weaknesses, and they're able to use them to build great products. Just because you're not a visionary as an engineer, if I'm a PM, that doesn't mean I can't work with you. It just means I need to now tailor the way in which I work with you, right? So I'll give you a good example of this. With one of the projects that I worked on, the contracting team that I had, the engineers that I got assigned, they were very good engineers, but they were very talented at execution. So what I did as an exercise was I kind of put them in this role where I asked them to go out and build and design a feature for me and put together a technical document, and they struggled. And when we met and we discussed it, they felt bad. And I told them, I said, no, there's nothing to feel bad about. This is just not what you're suited for. So I knew very from the get go, I'm like, okay, if I need to work with these people, I need to set the technical vision. I need to set the framework and the architecture in place. And then they can now come in and fill in the pieces. Once I put that system together, everything just fell together, came together beautifully. right? And we were able to work and they were able to do really, really well. So understanding people also allows you to kind of set them up for success, which effectively sets you up for success as well.
Perfect. I completely agree. Um, all right, so we have a question in the chat from Alexander. It is, what helps to recruit engineers and identify whether an engineer or engineering team is able to deliver on the product requirements document, perhaps before the charges by the hour come into play? I'll start. I wouldn't hire an engineering team unless you had a well-written product requirements document. I think a lot of times people are out talking to engineers and out, trying to hire that counterpart, let's say that CTO, without really having an understanding as to what actually needs to be built. And that's when the engineer is able to really oversell their skills, depending on like what actually ends up being fleshed out in your PRD and kind of in your vision and your strategic work for your product and either your product or your startup. So I wouldn't actually engage engineers until I had all of these things in place, especially like well-written PRDs. I wouldn't even start to think about interviewing or trying to hire them until I know what the scope of work actually is and specifically what actually needs to be built. I'm curious to hear from you, Zach, what you would say to Alexander's question.
So I'll start off by saying +1 to what you said, Jamila. One of the challenges that founders have in our space is everybody can do what you want until they have to do what you want. Um, I think that it is very crucial for you to have an understanding of the thing that you want to build. Because here's the reality, right? With anything that you want to build, there are always multiple ways to do it. A great engineer will ask you, where are you leaning? Because, for example, if you want a website that does a certain thing, I can probably get it done with a WordPress website and a few plugins, right? It's not this super technical or custom solution, but for where you are in your business, if you're prototyping or doing a proof of concept, that works. Unfortunately, because of the capitalist nature of society that we work in, most engineers aren't going to say that to you. They're going to try to upsell you on the more expensive solution, right? And so when you kind of think of the thing that you want to build, Jamila will probably harp on you about whether or not your thing is a product fit, and you need to be able to rapidly test it as well. So sometimes the process of testing can be very scrappy. It doesn't require you to have your app completely built where you've gone off and spent all of this money to build it right now before people can use it. That's typically not what works, because what you want is something that's very scrappy to a certain extent, that you can test these experiences with people, get feedback, and then quickly iterate and change, right? So knowing the thing that you want to build helps you do that better versus going to an engineer and leaning on them to tell you what you need. That's not the role of an engineer, right? The role, and like I said earlier, right? You want to sail off to Italy. I'm simply telling you what is the best direction you can go to avoid pitfalls. But you know why you want to go to Italy. You know why you want to sail there. You know the reasoning behind that. My job is to help you get there safely, right? So keep that in mind in terms of how you kind of phrase the dynamic or the relationship that you're building with engineers. If you have a question about, hey, I have my app and I want notifications in my app. You can ask an engineer a question about it, but and that's fine, right? There are forums or other places where you can have those questions and you can talk to a product person and they can go off and talk to an engineer. But I agree with Jamila, like you shouldn't be talking to engineers before you actually know what you want to build. Because, for example, from a PM perspective, some PMs actually work with people who are very well versed in what is that, JavaScript, and what is that other tool called, where they basically will create a mock-up, right, of the thing that you're trying to do before it's actually even an actual product or a website. And then we can take that mock-up and put it in front of customers and say, hey, if I asked you to purchase a shirt and I gave you this experience, what do you think about it? Like, there are ways to accomplish the things that you want to step by step. Not everything just requires you automatically to jump out the door and go start hiring engineers and start building. It's baby steps.
Completely agree. It is baby steps. So thank you, Zach, for joining us today and sharing all this great knowledge about not only your experience as a software engineer, but about how founders and PMs can take certain steps in order to work better with their own software engineers. I think it's really important for all of us, whether you're a PM or a founder, to figure out honestly, like not only what am I building, but why am I building it? And then really getting down deep into the details of PRDs and strategic documents that can support what it is that you're doing so that you're able to give your technical talent team, whether it's engineers or UX designers, more clarity and instruction on what needs to be done. And that's really where you're going to see that you have less variation in terms of the time that you initially thought it would take to build versus the time that it actually takes to build if you do a lot of that work up front. And so today's conversation was really more about, how do we work better with our own engineers as we build them, as we bring them on to our startups or into our teams as PMs, some of the things that we can do as founders and product managers to make this process easy on ourselves so that we don't get got if you're looking for a contract engineer and you just go out into the marketplace and try and start hiring people. At the end of the day, I think what I enjoyed the most about this conversation was that Zach is who he is. He's always been real with me, and I'm glad that he was able to keep it real with y'all today. So thank you again, Zach, for your insights today and for your time. And before we start to wrap up, I do want to know what other topics are top of mind for this group so that we can host next month's session. And so does anyone have any topics that they'd also like to explore? And we talked about product requirements documents. Is that something that people are currently using? Raise your hand if you're using product requirements documents today, and you're writing them, I should say. I don't think I'm seeing any raised hands. So does that mean that we are not using product requirements documents? And if so, is that a topic of interest for people to learn how to write these sort of documents so that you're able to communicate better with your engineers? Okay. All right. So we'll consider PRDs as a topic of interest. Where can we find PRD templates and best practices to complete as a founder? That is a good question. I mean, I certainly have like the templates that I've used at a number of different companies like LinkedIn and SAP. So I'm happy to drop a template into our LinkedIn group for product conversations. And that leads me into my last and final comment for today before we wrap is that since you've attended a session here, basically where I store all of the recordings and the links and the templates and any other things that we do in these sessions is in the LinkedIn group called Product Conversation Series. So anyone that's not in that group and this is your first time joining today's session, I will send you the link to that group so that you are then able to join. And that's where I communicate all the things to this group. I love that you guys came out today to learn more about the engineering perspective and how to improve and maintain your own operations internally with your startup or at your company as a PM. If there is anything that I can do for you in the interim, please let me know. You guys have my info. I think we're all connected on LinkedIn anyway, so feel free to reach out. And I will be sure to drop the recording and the template for the PRD in our conversation group on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Zach, for joining us today. Really, really, really appreciated your insights. And thank you guys for joining.
Thank you for
Until
having
next
me.
month. Of course, of course. Until next month, I will see you guys then. And then I'll see you guys in the group. If you have any questions, just feel free to join and drop those questions in that chat group.
Thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure. Make it a beautiful Wednesday, y'all. Have a beautiful Wednesday.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.